Hey everyone, today we're going to be going over a brief introduction to propensity score. Now, my name is Anthony. I am a graduate physician as of 2014. I did a postdoc for about 2.5 years at Spalding Neuromod Center, after which I obtained my MPH in quantitative methods at HSPH. And I currently work as a senior data scientist at CVS Aetna, where I specialize in chronic kidney disease startups within the company, and I leverage on a day-to-day basis concepts from randomized clinical trials, causal inference, and machine learning. In fact, much of the concepts I use from randomized clinical trials, I learned from PPCR in 2014. So it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to review some concepts with you today. Now, the main things I would like to cover in this very brief 10 to 15 minutes on propensity score is why we use propensity score, what is a propensity score, and how we can use it in different contexts. But to do that, it's important that we take a step back and reconsider or look at why we do randomized clinical trials or why we use randomization in the first place. So as you all know, at the end of PPCR, I'm sure you're all very familiar with this by now, that randomization is a key component to clinical trials. And it basically allows us to isolate the effect of an intervention or many interventions and study that intervention. Essentially, randomization balances known and unknown bias within our samples to ensure that the samples are exchangeable. And what does that really mean? Basically, it means that, when we randomize someone or a group into treatment A and placebo, if we were to switch that around, if we were to take the treatment A and switch it with placebo and placebo with treatment A, we should still be able to observe the same effect that we're studying. The group itself, or the characteristics of the group, should be balanced in a way that it allows us to isolate the effect of the intervention to study what we want to study, like survival or death. And that's demonstrated here in this table from the New England Journal of Medicine. As you can see, in the remdesivir group and in the placebo group, there's essentially an equal distribution of characteristics among those that received remdesivir and those that received placebo. So you see that the age, the distribution of sex, the race, the median time from symptom onset, and so forth is essentially the same between those that received remdesivir and those that received placebo. And that is absolutely an important concept. And that is the beauty and the power and the strength of randomized clinical trials. So essentially, randomization ensures exchangeability. And exchangeability allows us to study the effect of an intervention in an RCT. So if we divert our attention to the left-hand side, that's what I try to demonstrate here. In a typical RCT, let's say we're studying survival. So we see that on survival, we have the person survived or didn't survive. And then we have the treatment group. The person received remdesivir or placebo. And then if we boil that down a little bit, we have an outcome, which is Y, survive, no survive, 1 or 0, and the group, alpha, 1 or 0. And it's always conditional on randomization. That's the secret power of our RCTs. And if you look at it a little bit further, that's what's been showing here with this equation. We have E, which is the average effect on survival, Y, conditional on the person receiving treatment and randomization, subtracted from the average effect on survival, conditional on receiving no intervention and receiving randomization. That's what we always look at in a randomized clinical trial. The difference between those that received intervention and the difference that those that didn't receive intervention, always conditional on randomization. However, unfortunately, That's not always possible. We can't always do randomization. And there's multiple reasons why. Sometimes it's not ethically possible. Sometimes it's not financially feasible. Getting grants isn't always easy. It's a very competitive field. And sometimes it's not even structurally possible. Maybe we don't have the intervention that we're interested in. Maybe we don't have enough sample size. We don't have enough power to do the randomized clinical trial. So what do we do then? Do we give up? No. Normally we rely on design. So instead of doing a randomized trial, we'll fall back and look at observational design. And I'm sure you also discussed this, but basically the three main designs, or the broadest designs, are known as cohorts, case-controlled studies, and cross-sectional studies. And we use those methods when we can't do RCTs, when it's not feasible to do RCTs, and we want to simulate something as close to an RCT as possible. In addition to that, an added tool that you may not have enough, or you may not know much about as yet, is propensity score. So propensity score is used in these contexts when we can't do randomization. And why do we use propensity score? To replicate exchangeability. Essentially, propensity score is used to replicate the conditions of randomization and ensure that we have exchangeability. So we can isolate the differences between those that receive intervention and those that receive placebo. So propensity score is used to simulate exchangeability. If we look on the left-hand side of this representation, we have what we normally do in a randomized clinical trial, like we discussed before. The outcome is always studied conditional on randomization based on the group that the person's in, or the group that the individuals are in. Intervention or not intervention. Now in propensity score, what we're essentially doing is we're replacing randomization with the propensity score. So you can see already that in scenarios where randomization is impossible, this can be a very valuable tool to simulate what randomization can do where we're not able to actually do it. So what is the definition of a propensity score? And it's going to get a bit difficult here, maybe, but we'll go over it and you'll see that it's not so difficult when we're done with it. So a propensity score reflects the probability of receiving an intervention based on an individual's characteristics. And when I first heard that, I remember I was a little bit confused. Well, what does that really mean? So we'll break this down in the next couple slides. But basically, it's the probability of receiving an intervention based on someone's characteristics. So let's look at what this really means. So to do that, we need to understand how we compute the propensity score. And the way we compute the propensity score is by building normally a logistic regression where the y, or the outcome, the dependent variable, is treatment or the intervention. So we have in this example remdesivir and placebo. And then we build a logistic regression using the characteristics of the individuals in the cohort that we're studying. So we have age, we have gender, we have race, time to treatment, income, smoking, location like latitude, longitude, alcoholism, and so forth. So essentially, if we boil that down a little bit, we have A, which is the treatment group, and we have all of those extra features that we think influenced the person receiving the treatment. Now let's look at that a little bit more clearly. So this is a contrived example. We have 3 rows here. Each one of these rows represent an individual in our cohort that we're studying. TRT stands for treatment or intervention. Individual 1 received remdesivir and the other 2 received placebo. And then we have some of their characteristics, age, sex, race, so forth. What we do is that we build a logistic regression as shown here by this arrow. So we have the outcome as treatment, and then we have the explanatory variables as the individual's characteristics. So age, sex, race, and so forth. And then we take that model that we built, that what's known as the treatment model, and we use it to predict the probability or the likelihood of having received the treatment in the first place. So that's what we represent here by this blue line, by this blue arrow, and this blue column. So now that we build the treatment model, we predict on our own individuals the likelihood of having received their treatment. So in the first example, we see that the first individual had a propensity score of 0.89, and the other two as 0.27 and 0.8. So that's the first step when we're doing propensity score. Normally it's a three-step process where we first build a treatment model, then we predict an individual's propensity score, and then we use the propensity score to ensure exchangeability or to simulate randomization. So how do we do that once we have this propensity score? Well, three common ways are regression, stratification, and matching. So as before, when we did regression, we had survival as our outcome being explained by the person's group that they're in, whether they received the intervention or not, in this case remdesivir or placebo. But unlike before, what we're going to do is introduce the propensity score as a covariate. So that's represented here, or down here by theta. And what that allows us to do, or what that's essentially doing, is that it's balancing out, or it's controlling for all the other covariates that we included in the propensity score model. So now age, sex, gender, race, location, and so forth, theoretically now are being controlled for, and we're isolating the impact or the effect of remdesivir and placebo. Basically, we're ensuring exchangeability by using the propensity score in our outcome model, in our analysis of survival. So that's one way we can use propensity score in regression. Another method that's commonly used is stratification. Basically, we take the propensity score, divide it into quintiles or deciles, and we look at the outcome within each strata. In addition to looking at the outcome within each strata, the beauty of stratification is that we can look at the characteristics of the individuals within the strata. So in this example, we see that those who had a lower propensity score tend to be younger, and as the propensity score increased, they got older. Of course, you can do this with more variables, and that way you can have insight into who's actually receiving the treatment and what each strata represents, which is essential to understand how a treatment may work. It's possible that in one strata the treatment works and in another it doesn't. So that's quite useful when doing this sort of analysis. And then finally, matching, which is the most common method used with propensity score, is when we take an individual who received the treatment and match that individual to someone who's in the placebo or the control group based on their propensity score. So if someone had a propensity score of 0.89 and received the treatment, they may be matched with someone in control group who had a propensity score of 0.88 or 0.90, depending on how you do the matching. And though I can't go through today the different algorithms used for matching, generally they're all available, already built in Stata, R, Python, and SAS. So it's a very available method, and normally the algorithms exist in these softwares already built, so you don't have to build it from scratch. You just need to do the logistic regression, get the propensity score, and then you can match on the propensity score. Now, one of the issues with matching is that if you match on people who are between 0.6 and 0.8 in your propensity score, and you exclude everyone else, you're essentially studying the people with a propensity of 0.6 and 0.8. And that, while it increases your internal validity, can decrease a bit of the generalizability. So that's important to keep in mind when doing matching. So today we went through very briefly propensity score, and let's revisit the learning objectives. Let's see if we were able to answer them. The first thing was, why is propensity score used? It's used to obtain exchangeability when randomization is not possible. We also defined what a propensity score is. It's basically the likelihood of receiving a treatment conditional on an individual's characteristics, like their age, their sex, and their gender. And then finally, we looked at 3 ways we can use propensity score. The 3 ways were regression, stratification, and matching. And just one extra point, if this is something that you're interested in looking at and exploring further, I added in a small reference at the bottom. Right now, this reference leads you to a book that's free. It's called The Causal Inference Book by Miguel Hernan. All you have to do is click on that and it'll take you there, and you can download it and read more about propensity score and other methods which are used to replicate exchangeability when randomization isn't possible. Thank you, everyone. I hope this was useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. It's been a pleasure.